It was a cloudy morning when she walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, the cameras were ready, and hundreds of her employees sat waiting, expecting another typical company update. No one had any idea that this would be the moment that changed everything. Her name was Evelyn Hart, and she was the CEO of a technology company called Lyra Tech. A few years earlier, Lyra Tech had been a star in the industry, full of energy, fresh ideas, and bold dreams. But lately, everything had started falling apart. Sales were dropping. Customers were leaving. Investors were losing faith. Inside the company, people were scared. Whispers of layoffs filled the halls, and everyone knew that something was wrong. Something big. Evelyn had been watching this for months. She barely slept. Every night she sat in her small home office, surrounded by piles of reports, numbers, and emails. Her reflection in the window showed a tired woman, the kind who used to smile easily but now only frowned at spreadsheets. She knew that the company couldn't survive another year like this. The board wanted to cut costs, shut down entire departments, and fire at least a third of the team. It was the logical decision, they said. But deep down, Evelyn couldn't accept it. She knew the people behind those numbers. They were designers, coders, parents, dreamers, people who had given years of their lives to build this company. So when the annual meeting day came, she made a decision that even she didn't fully understand at the time. As she stepped onto that stage, she looked around the room. Faces full of worry stared back at her. People waiting to hear bad news. She took a deep breath, held the microphone, and spoke quietly at first. "I know you've all been hearing rumors," she said, "and I know that right now it feels like the walls are closing in. But I'm not here to give up on this company. I'm here to fight for it. And for every single one of you." The audience stayed silent. Then she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm making a promise. 1 year from now, Lyra Tech will be profitable again. And I'm going to do it without firing a single person." The silence turned into stunned disbelief. You could feel the air shift. People glanced at each other, trying to understand what they'd just heard. A few clapped weakly at first, then more joined in, until the whole hall was filled with hesitant applause mixed with confusion. After the speech, the reactions were all over the place. Some employees were inspired. Others were doubtful. One whispered to another, "She's crazy. There's no way she can do that." And maybe they were right. Because after the meeting, when Evelyn returned to her office and shut the door behind her, the weight of her own words hit her like a storm. What had she just promised? How could she possibly deliver that? The company's finances were in terrible shape. Investors were already threatening to pull out. Her advisors thought she had lost her mind. But Evelyn couldn't back down now. That night, she sat at her desk staring at the company's financial data until 3 a.m. The numbers didn't lie. They were bleeding money. Everything seemed impossible. Over the next few weeks, she worked nonstop. She held long meetings, reviewed projects, and pushed her team harder than ever. She told herself that if she just worked more, thought more, tried more, she could make it happen. But the harder she pushed, the worse things got. Departments were clashing. People were exhausted. The creativity that had once made Lyra Tech great was gone. Instead of solving problems, employees were just trying to survive another day without being yelled at. Evelyn felt herself slipping too. She was supposed to be the leader, confident, strong, and fearless. But she felt more like a soldier trapped in a war she couldn't win. She began skipping meals, staying up all night and drinking too much coffee. Her friends stopped hearing from her. One Friday night, she sat alone in the office long after everyone had left. The lights were off except for the soft glow of her computer screen. She looked around at the empty desks, the half-finished projects, the coffee cups left behind. Signs of people who still believed in her. Tears burned her eyes. For the first time in years, she admitted it to herself. She was scared. Not just scared of failing the company, but scared of failing all those people who had trusted her. The next morning, she didn't go to work. She stayed home, lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was blank. The thought of checking her email made her sick. For a moment, she thought about giving up. She could step down, blame the economy, and let someone else take over. But then her eyes fell on something she hadn't noticed in a long time. A piano, covered in dust, sitting quietly in the corner of her living room. It had belonged to her mother, who taught her to play when she was a child. She hadn't touched it in years, not since life got too busy. Something inside her whispered, "Play one note." So she did. At first, her fingers were stiff and unsure. The sound was soft, a little off-key, but as the minutes passed, her hands began to remember. The melody grew smoother, warmer. For the first time in months, Evelyn stopped thinking about deadlines, investors, and reports. She just played. An hour passed, then two. When she finally stopped, she felt different, lighter somehow. The problems were still there, but her mind was calmer. She realized something she had forgotten. When she played music, she didn't force anything. She listened, she felt, she adjusted, and maybe that was what she needed to do with her company. The next Monday, when she returned to the office, people noticed a change. She wasn't rushing or snapping orders anymore. She looked rested. When her assistant asked if everything was okay, Evelyn smiled. A real smile, the kind no one had seen in a while. That week, instead of calling another meeting about numbers, she gathered her team and asked a new question. What would you try if you weren't afraid of failing? The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was surprise. Someone finally spoke up with an idea. Then another person added something. Soon the group was brainstorming like they hadn't in months. It was messy, loud, and full of laughter. But something was different. There was life again. That night, as Evelyn drove home, she thought about what had changed. It wasn't the budget or the product. It was something deeper, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, they could start playing again, instead of just fighting to survive. For the first time since she made that impossible promise, Evelyn didn't feel trapped. She felt curious. And she had no idea that this small change and this return to playing would be the start of a complete transformation. Because sometimes, the road to keeping an impossible promise doesn't begin with a plan or a spreadsheet. It begins with a single note on a dusty piano and a leader who dares to stop forcing and start feeling again. The following weeks were not easy. After that strange but peaceful weekend with the piano, she felt more calm, but the world around her was still chaos. The company was still losing money. Projects were still delayed. And the investors were still calling her phone every day, asking for answers she didn't have. Evelyn sat at her desk one morning, staring at an email from one of the biggest investors. The message was cold and direct. If things don't improve in the next quarter, we'll have to withdraw our funding. She closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. For a long moment, she didn't move. She could almost hear the echo of that piano note she had played a few nights ago. Something in her told her not to panic this time. Instead of reacting out of fear, she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Okay, let's find a new rhythm." She started her day differently. Instead of rushing into meetings, she called in a few people from different departments, people who usually never sat together in the same room. There was a quiet young designer, a software engineer, a marketing intern, and a finance officer. They looked confused when she asked them to join her. When everyone sat down, she said softly, "I don't want numbers today. I don't want reports. I want to know what's really going on, how you feel, what's not working, what we're missing." At first, no one spoke. They weren't used to this kind of question. Normally, meetings were about deadlines, reports, or performance charts. But this one felt different. Finally, the young designer broke the silence. "Honestly," she said, "it feels like we've stopped creating. We're just trying to keep things alive, not make them better." The others nodded slowly. The engineer added, "Everyone's scared of mistakes. We spend more time avoiding failure than actually building things." Evelyn listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. She took notes, asked gentle questions, and by the end of the hour there was a list on the board, not of problems, but of feelings. Words like tired, afraid, frustrated, stuck, silent. As she looked at those words, she realized something simple but powerful. The company didn't need just better strategies. It needed hope. It needed energy. It needed heart. That evening, she went home early for the first time in months. She made tea, sat by the window, and watched the rain. Her piano was there again in the corner, waiting. She played a few soft notes and thought about the day. In music, she realized mistakes were part of the process. You hit a wrong note, you listen, you fix it, and you move on. No one stops the song. But in business, people treated every mistake like the end of the world. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe people had forgotten how to play, how to experiment. The next morning, she called a full team meeting. Everyone expected another serious talk about performance. But when she walked into the room, she was smiling. That alone made people whisper. It had been a long time since they'd seen that. "I've been thinking," she said. "We've been doing things the same way for too long. It's not working. So let's try something new. Let's stop being afraid of mistakes. Let's start experimenting again." She told them about her piano, how she had started playing again, and how it reminded her that creativity only comes when you stop being afraid of being wrong. She could see confusion in some faces, but curiosity in others. Then she gave them a challenge. "Starting this week," she said, "every department will get 1 day each month to try something new. No rules, no restrictions. Build something, test something, imagine something. You don't need to ask for permission. You just need to share what you learn." There was silence again. Then someone laughed nervously. "You mean, just play around?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "Play around. Let's make this company a place that plays again." At first, the idea sounded ridiculous. Some managers rolled their eyes. Others thought it was a waste of time. But a few brave teams decided to give it a try. One small group started designing a simpler version of their main app, something they'd wanted to test for months but never had time for. Another team built a fun internal tool just to make meetings easier. A group from marketing made a playful social media campaign that didn't even mention their product. It just told stories about creativity and work-life balance. Evelyn watched all of it closely. She didn't judge, didn't interfere. She just encouraged. And slowly something began to shift. People started staying a little longer in the office. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The mood changed. There was laughter in the hallways again. Someone even brought a guitar one Friday and played during lunch. For the first time in months, the building felt alive. But it wasn't all easy. The board members were not happy. They thought she was wasting time on games while profits were falling. One of them called her and said sharply, "You're running a company, not an art class. Stop this nonsense." Evelyn listened quietly, and when he finished, she said calmly, "Maybe you're right. But what if playing is exactly what saves us?" He didn't have an answer to that. The next few weeks tested her more than ever. Every day she had to balance pressure from the board with her belief in her people. Some experiments failed completely. Some ideas went nowhere, but others, just a few, and showed promise. One day, a group of young developers came to her office, smiling like kids who had just discovered something exciting. "We think we found a new feature that could change everything," they said. They showed her a prototype, a new tool inspired by music composition apps. It allowed users to organize complex data in visual patterns like notes on a sheet of music. It wasn't perfect, but it was fresh, creative, and full of potential. Evelyn's eyes lit up. "This," she said softly, "is exactly what I meant." She approved a small budget to develop it further. It wasn't a big official project yet, just something worth exploring. The team started working day and night, not because they were told to, but because they were excited again. Meanwhile, Evelyn kept her new habit alive. Every night, no matter how busy the day was, she played the piano for at least 15 minutes. It became her secret meeting with herself, a way to quiet her mind and remind her of what really mattered, and slowly that calmness began to show in her leadership. She was more patient in meetings. She listened more. She smiled more often. Even when problems came, and they always did, she faced them with a different kind of strength. People noticed. One afternoon, as she was walking through the office, one of her employees stopped her and said quietly, "I don't know what changed, but thank you. The place feels alive again." Evelyn just nodded, hiding the small tear that threatened to escape her eye. She knew things were still fragile. The company wasn't saved yet. The promise she had made still hung over her like a cloud. But something was different now. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. The team believed again. That night, she sat at her piano once more. The city lights blinked outside her window, and her hands moved softly across the keys. The music flowed without force, like a conversation between her heart and her hopes. She didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't know if the investors would stay or if her new ideas would work. But she knew one thing for sure. She had stopped fighting against everything and started dancing with it instead. And sometimes, that small change, and from fighting to flowing, is where impossible things begin. The melody filled her living room, rising and falling just like her journey. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But neither was she. And for the first time in a long time, that was perfectly okay. The small experiment that began as a playful idea was now turning into something bigger. It had started with just a few lines of code and a group of curious developers, but now the whole office was talking about it. Everyone wanted to see what this music-inspired tool could do. The concept was simple: organize data in patterns, the way a musician sees notes on a sheet. It helped people visualize complex projects in a creative, flowing way. It made boring information look like art. And somehow that made people enjoy using it. When Evelyn saw the first working version, she couldn't stop smiling. It was rough, sure, but it was beautiful in its own strange way. The team called it Project Harmony. The name fit perfectly. For the first time in months, people were excited again. Even those who weren't working directly on the project stayed late to help test it. The energy in the office felt new, alive. It wasn't just work anymore. It was play with purpose. Evelyn walked through the halls one evening, watching her employees laugh over screens, debate ideas, and sketch designs on whiteboards filled with colorful notes. She couldn't believe this was the same company that had felt so heavy and silent just a few months earlier. But while the team was rediscovering their spark, not everything was easy behind the scenes. The board members still didn't understand what she was doing. They wanted fast results, not experiments. They kept sending her emails demanding updates on profit margins and client numbers. She tried to explain that things were changing, that morale was improving and creativity was coming back. But they didn't see it. All they saw were numbers. One day, during a tense meeting with the investors, one of them leaned forward and said, "You promised us profit in a year. We don't see it yet. When will this music idea of yours actually make money?" Evelyn didn't get defensive. Instead, she smiled calmly and said, "Soon. We're rebuilding the foundation first. The money will come when the people believe again." Some of them rolled their eyes. But one older investor, quiet until then, said softly, "Keep going. I like what I'm hearing." That gave her strength. Back at the office, the team continued refining the project. They worked like musicians tuning instruments, testing, adjusting, improving. Evelyn made sure they had what they needed: food, tools, support, and most importantly, encouragement. She stopped running endless formal meetings. Instead, she began holding short creative sessions she called jam hours. Everyone could join, no matter their department. They'd sit together, toss around ideas, even draw them out on boards or napkins. Some ideas were wild and impossible, but that was the point. The atmosphere felt like a music studio rather than a tech company. People from marketing would sit with engineers. Designers would chat with finance people. Barriers disappeared. And from that open space, more ideas started to appear. One designer suggested turning the app's interface into something that responded to sound, a visual rhythm. An engineer figured out a way to make the data move like waves so users could feel the flow of their projects. Evelyn was amazed. "This," she said one evening, "is what innovation really looks like. Not pressure, not fear, but freedom." Outside, though, she was still facing challenges. Some clients had left months ago and hadn't come back. The competition was growing. There were still bills to pay, salaries to protect, and deadlines to meet. She didn't have the luxury of failure. There were nights when she still sat alone in her office, staring at the city lights through the window. Some nights she doubted herself, wondering if all this creative play would actually save the company or just delay the inevitable. But every time she felt that fear, she went home and sat at her piano. She would play softly until her breathing slowed and her thoughts settled. It became a ritual, a way to remind herself that chaos can create harmony if you let it. And slowly, harmony started to appear not just in her music, but in her company too. 3 months later, the team presented her with the final version of Project Harmony. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was an experience. It looked and felt like nothing else on the market. They showed her how a user could drag, drop, and move tasks the way a musician arranges notes. They had even added sound effects, gentle tones that played when something was completed. It made productivity feel joyful. When Evelyn saw the demo, she clapped her hands in delight. "This," she said, "is the sound of our comeback." They launched it quietly at first, testing it with a few longtime clients. The feedback was better than anyone expected. People said it made work feel less stressful and more intuitive. One user even wrote, "This doesn't feel like software. It feels like art that helps me get things done." Word began to spread. A few tech bloggers picked up the story. Then a small business magazine wrote an article titled, "The Company That Plays to Win." That phrase stuck. Within weeks, new clients began reaching out, curious about the company that had turned failure into creativity. Sales started climbing again. Not fast, but steady, like a melody building note by note. Inside the office, there was celebration. After months of fear and doubt, people were proud again. They had built something that mattered, something born not from panic but from passion. Evelyn gathered everyone together one Friday afternoon. The air was filled with laughter and the smell of pizza. She stood in the middle of the room, looking at all the faces around her. Faces that had once looked tired and hopeless, now shining with energy and pride. "You did this," she said simply. "You made the impossible possible." The room erupted in cheers. Someone shouted, "To the promise!" And they all raised their cups. But deep inside, Evelyn knew the journey wasn't over yet. The company was turning around, but the pressure was still there. The promise she had made, 1 year to save the company without firing anyone, was only halfway done. Still, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. She trusted her team, and they trusted her. That night, as she left the office, the lights were still on behind her. People were still working, still laughing, still creating. It made her smile. When she reached home, she didn't go straight to her piano. Instead, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, listening to the sounds of the city. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear music playing from another building. It reminded her that creativity was like sound. It travels, it spreads, and it touches people without needing permission. She thought about how far they'd come. Months ago, she had been drowning in stress, afraid to fail. Now she was leading a team that dared to dream again, all because she had stopped chasing perfection and started embracing play. The next morning, when she walked into the office, her assistant handed her a thick envelope. It was from one of the investors who had once doubted her the most. She opened it nervously and found a simple handwritten note inside. It said, "I was wrong. You were right. Keep playing." Evelyn laughed out loud, a full, real laugh that made her eyes shine. She pinned the note to her office wall, right next to a photo of her first piano recital as a child. 2 reminders side by side, one from her past, one from her present, both telling her the same thing, that sometimes the most serious success stories begin with a little play. From that day on, play became more than just a philosophy at Lyra Tech. It became part of their identity. The company began running creative workshops where employees from all levels, even the security guards and janitors, were invited to share ideas. No idea was too small or too strange. One worker suggested adding a daily 5-minute creativity break for everyone. Another proposed turning the cafeteria into a space for mini art displays. Slowly, the company transformed, not just financially, but culturally. They were no longer just surviving. They were thriving, one playful note at a time. And deep down, Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. The promise she had made still guided her like a soft tune in the background, steady, hopeful, and alive. She had started by playing the piano to clear her mind. But now, her entire company was playing along with her, creating harmony from chaos, one note, one step, one dream at a time. Months had passed since that quiet promise on stage, the one everyone thought was impossible. Now the impossible was starting to look real. The company that once stood on the edge of failure was finally waking up again. The new product, Project Harmony, had started to make waves. At first, only a few small businesses were using it. Then word spread faster than anyone expected. Reviews appeared online calling it a refreshing way to work, creativity in motion, and the software that feels human. Within weeks, more clients signed up. Then a major company reached out, asking for a custom version of the platform. That deal alone changed everything. It brought in the kind of money that could stabilize the business. When the news came, the whole office erupted in cheers. People hugged, laughed, and even cried. After so many months of tension and fear, the energy was electric. Evelyn stood in the middle of it all, smiling quietly. She didn't need to make a big speech this time. The joy on their faces said it all, but deep down she remembered something. This success didn't come from panic or pressure. It came from play. From the nights when she sat alone at her piano and remembered how to listen, not force. That's what had led them here. One Friday evening, she stayed late after everyone left. She walked through the office, past the desks, the whiteboards, the screens still glowing with new ideas. It felt peaceful. She ran her fingers across one of the tables, still scattered with sticky notes full of sketches and plans. She thought about the journey, from sleepless nights filled with fear to this quiet moment filled with gratitude. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the investors. It said simply, "Congratulations. You did it," Evelyn smiled but typed back, "Not yet. We're still playing." Because she knew this wasn't the end. It was the middle of something beautiful. Over the next few months, Lyra Tech became known as the company that plays. Business schools started studying their new way of working. Journalists wrote about how a failing tech company turned itself around not by cutting jobs, but by encouraging creativity and joy. Reporters began calling Evelyn a visionary CEO, but she didn't see herself that way. She saw herself as someone who had once been scared and tired, and had found her way back through something simple and human. She was invited to speak at a leadership conference in another city. She almost said no. She wasn't sure she had anything special to say. But her team insisted. "You should tell your story," they told her. People need to hear it, so she went. The auditorium was packed. CEOs, managers, and young entrepreneurs filled the seats, expecting another business talk about numbers and strategies. But when Evelyn walked on stage, she spoke softly like she was talking to friends. "I'm not here to give you a formula," she said. "I'm here to tell you a story." She told them everything, the sleepless nights, the mistakes, the fear, and the moment she made that promise she didn't know how to keep. Then she told them about the piano, how one evening she decided to stop forcing herself to think and just play. "That moment changed everything," she said, "because I realized that I had forgotten what it means to create. I was leading from fear, not from inspiration." She explained how that small act and returning to play changed her leadership, her team, and eventually the company. She told them about Project Harmony, about how it grew from a playful experiment into something real and valuable. The audience was completely silent. You could hear every breath. Then when she finished, the room erupted in applause. Some people even stood up. After the event, people lined up to talk to her. One man said, "I've been running my company like a battlefield. Maybe I need to start making music instead." Evelyn smiled and said, "You don't need a piano. Just find your rhythm again." When she returned home, she sat at her piano again, her fingers resting on the keys. She didn't play right away. She just sat there, thinking about how far she and her company had come. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. It felt peaceful, like everything had finally fallen into place. But even as success grew, she made sure the company didn't forget where it came from. Every Friday, she held what she called play sessions, open hours when anyone could come share ideas, stories, or even just music. Sometimes people brought instruments, sometimes they shared personal projects, and sometimes they just talked about life. It wasn't about productivity. It was about connection. And those sessions became the heart of Lyra Tech's culture. People who had once been too afraid to speak up now shared ideas freely. One of the interns came up with a feature that later became one of their top-selling tools. A designer started teaching a mini art class during lunch breaks. Even the office security guard brought in a small drum one day and joined the fun. The company had turned into something rare, a place where work felt human again. Of course, there were still challenges. Some months were tough. Some projects failed. But the difference was no one gave up. They didn't fear mistakes anymore. They learned from them. They didn't chase success. They created it together. And through it all, Evelyn stayed humble. She didn't act like a hero. She was still learning, still listening, still playing. Then one day, something unexpected happened. A major international magazine contacted her. They wanted to put her on the cover with the headline, "The CEO who made an impossible promise," and kept it. When she saw the draft of the article, she couldn't help but laugh. It made her sound like she had a master plan all along, like she had known exactly what she was doing. But she hadn't. She had stumbled, fallen, doubted, and cried. She had learned everything the hard way. She told the journalist, "If you write about me, please also write about them. My people. They're the real story," and the journalist did. The article featured photos of her team, laughing, working, brainstorming together. It showed their faces, not just hers, and that more than anything made her proud. When the article came out, it went viral. Other companies started reaching out, asking if she could train their leaders. Universities invited her to speak to students. She became a symbol of a new kind of leadership, one built on creativity, empathy, and courage. But despite all the attention, she never let it get to her head. She still arrived at work early, still made time to walk through the office and greet people by name. She still played the piano at home every night. Sometimes during late evenings, she would stay back after everyone left. She'd turn off the lights, walk to the big glass window in her office, and look out at the skyline. The reflection showed a woman who had changed, not just her company, but herself. She thought about that moment when she had made the promise, scared, uncertain, and desperate. She thought about the nights when she almost gave up. And she thought about that one evening when she touched the piano keys and everything slowly began to shift. Now, the promise didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt fulfilled, but she also knew something deeper. That success isn't a destination, it's a rhythm. You keep playing, adjusting, and listening. Some days the music flows, and some days it doesn't. But as long as you keep playing, the song goes on. One evening, she found herself alone in the office again, just like the early days. But this time it wasn't silence that filled the air. It was music. From somewhere down the hallway, someone was playing a small keyboard. It was off-key, imperfect, but full of life. Evelyn smiled. The sound echoed softly through the halls, the sound of a promise kept and a company reborn. She didn't interrupt. She just stood there listening, her heart full, because she knew this was what it was all about. Not profits, not headlines, not awards, but people. Real people who had found joy again in what they did. And as the music drifted through the night, Evelyn whispered to herself, "We did it. We really did it." Then she turned off the last light, closed her office door, and walked out, smiling, peaceful, and ready for whatever came next. The melody continued behind her, steady and soft, like a heartbeat reminding her of everything they had built together. Not through power or pressure, but through play. And that was how the impossible promise became a living story, one that didn't end when the company turned profitable, but continued in every laugh, every idea, every note still being played inside those walls. A year had passed since that morning when she had stood on stage and made the promise that everyone thought was impossible. It felt like a lifetime ago. So much had changed since then, not just for the company, but for her too. The day of the annual meeting arrived again. The same event where it had all begun. The hall looked brighter this time. The same employees who once sat in silence now filled the room with laughter and confidence. There were banners on the walls showing the company's new logo, colorful, vibrant, full of life. When Evelyn walked in, the whole room stood up to applaud. She hadn't expected that. She smiled shyly, her eyes shining. It wasn't the applause that touched her. It was what it meant. They weren't clapping for a speech or a title. They were clapping because they had done something extraordinary together. When the room quieted down, she walked to the microphone and looked around. "Last year," she said softly, "I stood here and made a promise I didn't know how to keep. I said we'd be profitable again, without losing a single person. Most people thought it couldn't be done. To be honest, even I wasn't sure." She paused, looking at the faces around her, the designers, the developers, the marketing team, the cleaning staff, everyone who had stayed through the storm. "But we did it," she continued, "and not just because of numbers. We did it because we remembered how to be human. We remembered how to create, how to laugh, how to play." The crowd cheered again, some wiping away tears. She went on to share how much the company had grown, the new clients, the international deals, the rise in profit, but she didn't spend much time on the numbers. She spoke about people instead. About the night the developers stayed late to finish the product. About the cleaner who suggested a better workspace layout. About the designer who brought art into the office. "These stories," she said, "are our real profits." When she finished speaking, the entire room stood up again. It was not a business meeting anymore. It was a celebration of survival, creativity, and unity. Later that evening, after the event ended, Evelyn stayed behind in the empty hall. The lights were dim now. She walked to the stage and sat at the edge, her feet dangling, looking at the empty chairs. She thought back to that first promise, how scared she had been, how heavy everything had felt. She remembered the long nights of doubt, the quiet tears, the endless pressure, and then she remembered the piano, the simple sound that had started everything. She closed her eyes and smiled. The next day, she arrived at work earlier than usual. The office was quiet. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, lighting up the white walls and colorful post-it notes. She walked to her desk and saw a small package waiting for her. It was wrapped in brown paper with a short note on top. "Thank you for keeping your promise, from all of us." Inside was a small crystal music note, a gift from the employees. It sparkled in the light, delicate yet strong. She held it in her hand, and for a moment she felt tears in her eyes. She placed it on her desk beside her computer, where it caught the sunlight every morning after that. As the weeks passed, Lyra Tech continued to grow. They opened a second office, hired new people, and even began mentoring young startups. But Evelyn made sure the company's heart never changed. Every new employee was told the story, how the company almost collapsed, and how they had rebuilt it through creativity and kindness. She started a new internal program called the Play Project. Every month, employees from all levels worked together on something outside of their usual job, maybe a community project, a fun invention, or a creative event. It became one of the most loved traditions in the company, and Evelyn kept her own tradition too, the piano. Every Friday evening after everyone had left, she would sit by the piano in her office and play for a few minutes. It was her quiet reminder of where it all began. Sometimes other employees would stay late just to listen from the hallway. They said the music made the building feel alive. One Friday night after she finished playing, she heard a soft knock on the door. It was one of the new interns, nervous, holding a notebook. "Sorry to bother you," he said shyly. "I just wanted to say, your story really inspired me. I joined this company because I read about how you turned things around. I want to learn how to lead like that someday." Evelyn smiled warmly. "You will," she said. "Just remember, leading isn't about being perfect. It's about listening, caring, and never forgetting to play." The young intern nodded, smiling, and left. Evelyn watched him go and thought about how every new face, every new dream, was now part of something bigger, a story that would keep growing long after her. Months later, she was invited to a global leadership summit, this time as the keynote speaker. She almost turned it down again, but her team convinced her. "You have to share it," they said. When she took the stage at the event, it was in front of thousands of people from around the world. CEOs, educators, artists, and students filled the hall. She looked out at them and began her talk not with statistics or slides, but with a story. She told them about the time she was scared, about the impossible promise, about how she found herself again through the act of playing music. She told them how she realized that leadership wasn't about control, but about connection, not about perfection, but about trust. When she finished, she said, "The world doesn't need more people chasing success. It needs more people who know how to create it with heart." The hall went silent for a moment. Then the applause came, loud, long, and full of feeling. After the talk, many people came up to her, strangers from different countries, telling her how her story had moved them. Some said they wanted to lead differently now. Others said they were going to bring back creativity in their companies, their schools, their families. That night, as she sat in her hotel room, she looked out at the city lights and realized something. Her story had gone far beyond the walls of her company. It had become a reminder for people everywhere that sometimes the way to solve big problems starts with something small and simple, like playing again. When she returned home, her team was waiting for her at the office with a surprise. They had organized a celebration not for profits or awards, but for her. On the big screen in the meeting room, they had made a short video, clips of their journey together. There were scenes of the first chaotic days, of laughter during play sessions, of the moment Project Harmony launched, and of all the small milestones in between. The final message on the screen said, "You taught us to believe again." When the video ended, the room was quiet for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. Evelyn stood there, smiling, tears glistening in her eyes. She didn't give a speech that night. She didn't need to. She just looked around and said softly, "Thank you. You're the reason I kept the promise." Later, when everyone had left and the lights were off, she walked to her office window. The city glowed beneath the night sky. On her desk, the crystal music note still shimmered in the moonlight. She touched it gently, then sat at her piano once more. As her fingers moved across the keys, she thought about everything: the struggle, the fear, the discovery, and the growth. The melody she played was calm, steady, and full of peace. This time there was no pressure, no deadline, no worry. Just music. And as the notes filled the room, she smiled to herself and whispered, "The promise is complete." But deep down, she knew it wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning, for her people, and for anyone who heard the story of the CEO, who once made an impossible promise and kept it. Not by working harder than everyone else, but by remembering something simple and true, that life, like music, becomes beautiful when you stop trying to control every note and simply start playing.